So I'm Anna Barber. I'm the managing director of Techstars LA, and I'd just like to thank Raina for hosting and the amazing Spero Ventures team for supporting this event. This is really special. There's a lot of women I know and love in this room, and then a lot of new ones I'm excited to meet, and thanks for all coming out. So just a little bit about my background before running Techstars. I've had a varied career. I was a corporate lawyer, I was a management consultant, I was a product person at a tech company, I was a founder, I was a talent manager and a film producer, and I'm also an executive coach. So if anyone wants to talk about career shifting, like I am your girl. And now I run the LA chapter of Techstars. So Techstars is the global network that helps entrepreneurs succeed. We've invested in 1,600 companies. We have 45 accelerator programs around the world. And we've run 2 programs here in Los Angeles. Some alumni are actually in this room, and I'm currently meeting with companies for the 2019 class. I also have a very strong commitment both to supporting this ecosystem, which I'm very excited about, and then also to investing in women and other underrepresented founders. So I'm very excited today to be able to speak with Shripiya Mahesh, who is the founding general partner at Spero Ventures, as Has said. Investing in well-being, work and purpose, and human connection. She started her career as an operator, which I think is an important fact, notably in product at eBay, where she was an early employee. So it's great to see you.
Enough, but yes.
So, I'd love to start from the beginning. You were one of the original girls who code. You actually learned to code when you were 10.
Yes.
So how did that affect your early career?
Yeah, so the background is my father was really ahead of his time. This was in the, I know I'm dating myself, but early 80s, before many people in this room were born. And he decided, he played around on computers and he said, I think this is the future, and my children, my brother is a year younger than me, they should learn to code. And so there was no boot camps, there was no way to learn. So he found a young guy at a local engineering college, and he came home and taught us BASIC on a Sinclair. And this was a great question because it really made me think about how it's changed, how I think about the world. And it had an impact on me in so many ways, right? The first one was I learned with my brother, who's one of the smartest guys I know. He rolls out of bed, takes a test, and scores perfectly. And it made me realize that I can do what he can do, right? My parents treated us both equally. We were both learning at the same time. And I was like, oh yeah, I can do anything he can do. So there was this element of, wasn't an element of I'm a woman, and this was India in the 80s, which is where I grew up. And so it wasn't, I never felt like I couldn't do anything. And that's stayed true.
Yeah, and that really resonates with me as well. My mother had a PhD and she was always running her own business, and I was sort of blind to this idea that there were things that shouldn't be open to me, or that I wasn't supposed to be good at math or science. It wasn't part of my vernacular because it's not how I grew up, and I think that was a massive advantage, and it sounds like it was for you as well.
It was, and I think the other thing is it just made me unafraid. So I ended up learning to code in C and COBOL when I was in college. And I have never been afraid of breaking a computer. I hacked the first iPhone to get it off the AT&T network. And so, it made me realize that it made me love tech, and it made me unafraid to try things. And so I always think that, to me, coding is a language that you have to speak, because it gives you degrees of freedom that you don't have if you don't know how to do it. And it really is what got me into product. So,
I always say I was in product as well, and I always say I speak, I'm not an engineer, but I speak engineer, right? You actually speak engineer. So you define yourself as a product person. It's one of the things when people ask you to describe yourself that you include. So what does that mean, and why is that so essential?
Yeah, I think product is the most, I'm biased, right? So I ran global product at eBay, and I just feel like product is what makes everything work. It's what makes technology work. And so now when I meet companies, I always say, hey, explain to me how the product works, because that's how I find my way to understanding the company. Because thinking about it from a user perspective is so important. You can have companies come in many different kinds, right? They can be sales-driven companies, engineering-driven companies, product-driven companies. But even in those companies, your product has to be amazing because you can fix marketing, you can fix sales. But if the fundamental product doesn't work, then you don't have a great business. So I always think about it from what's the user experience. And for me, it's bigger, product for me is bigger than just the companies that I invest in, the tech companies that I think about it all the time, right? I'm on a Peloton, and I'm like, oh, I wish they did A, B, or C, Or I'm like using cosmetics, and I'm like, oh, there's so much plastic wasted here. Like, I wish they had redesigned it this way. And so to me, it's just thinking creatively about what's the best user experience. Yeah. And it's also creative problem solving, because a big part of product is how do I solve this problem to make it the best experience that it can be for the user. So I think product people, and I'm biased, product people are just, they are so creative and so thoughtful. And
what's interesting is that it's a lens through which you see the world, yeah. And it's almost like you're constantly reverse engineering everything you see around you. And what else occurred to me as you were just talking is that it gives you a certain perspective that things don't have to be taken for granted the way they are. That in fact, everything is subject to analysis and deconstruction to see if it could be done a better way.
Yeah, and that reminds me of, you guys have probably all heard about the Steve Jobs quote, which is, don't accept the world as it is, because someone made it. Someone made these rules by which we work. And if someone made these rules by which we live and work, then you can change those rules, right? And so I think that's a very product mindset, which is, why does it doesn't have to be this way, it can be this other way. So I think that's a product person's view of the world.
Which is essentially a hopeful view of the world,
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Which we'll come back to. But first, I want to talk about your experience in the entertainment industry. So we also have this in common. I mean, I left tech in 2001 to become a talent manager and a film producer, and I actually co-founded the U.S. Air Guitar Championships, which I say like all the time because it is the most random fact about me. And you also left to study film and make film. So what was that about?
So I wanted to be a photographer when I was a child, and I was growing up in India, and my parents were like, "That is such a great hobby." And so it was in the back of my mind for a long time, and when I had the opportunity to move to New York, I could have either gone and done product at another large company, or I could have done something. I always wanted to do this, and so I said, okay, I'm just gonna apply. And so I ended up applying to NYU Graduate Film School and getting in, and it was amazing. They take 36 students a year, so it was a great experience with my classmates. It was nonstop work, literally 20 hours a day. It was the most interesting. There were times I was directing, and there were times I was sitting on a street watching equipment. And one of those times, I had a friend walk by, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm watching the equipment."
Yeah, film production, not very glamorous.
Not very glamorous, but so much fun. Mm-hmm. And the way I think about it is, life's an adventure. And I ended up coming back to tech. So in a way, I didn't stay in film, but I'm really glad I did it, because if I hadn't done it, I would have really always wondered, should I have done it? And I'd have regretted not doing it, and now I did it. And there was so much I learned from it, and I feel like film and tech are just so similar. You come up with an idea, you gotta convince people that they should work on the idea. Then you shoot the film, which is about so much of it is detail, right? Like, where do you place the camera? How do you light it? You're working with a huge set of people you're dependent on to do that. And then, you edit it, and I've edited short films of 13 minutes for thousands of hours. So, it's like the iteration. And unlike tech, you can't change it once it's live, right? So that's the big difference. But other than that, there's just so much similarity.
And that's the reason why I came back to tech, actually.
Yeah.
That very reason, right? Because you constantly get to continue to tinker and iterate and learn, right? Whereas once you've kind of done a day of shooting, if you don't have budget, you can't go back. That day's in the can.
Yeah.
But what's so interesting is you got to build your storytelling muscle kind of after building this way of looking at the world. Then you gain this extra skill set about, telling stories about that,
Yeah, and it's really hard. I mean, I will say like film school is probably the hardest thing I've ever done, right? Because you're in a class, you're sharing your work, and it's getting constantly ripped apart. So in a way, it's very much like being an entrepreneur, right? You're presenting it in front of people who will tell you why it's not a good idea and why it's not a fit for them. And in fact, I actually think acting is probably the hardest job in the film industry because, people go out for auditions over, and I have very good friends who are actors, and, it's
like the fundraising process.
It's the fundraising process.
You have 280 meetings until someone says yes.
Yeah, and it's like,
and it feels personal when you're rejected.
Exactly, and it could be you could be an amazing person, right? But in their heads, they have like, the person's 5'5", and you're 5'4", or you're 5 foot something else, and they're like, oh no, versus just adapting to that, right? Or you're blonde when they wanted someone who was, brunette, and it's just such a hard job in film. And again, like I just think that similarities between tech and film are they're significant.
And you found your way back to tech then.
Yeah.
So did you make a conscious decision to become an investor, or how did that come about?
So I made a conscious decision to come back to tech because, I wrote a feature script coming out of film school, and it got into like, Film Independent here and then IFP in New York. But I realized that it just takes so long to like make a feature, and I was like, there's so many gatekeepers, labs, festivals, producers, that growing up in tech, that was just very hard to deal with. And so I made a conscious decision to come back to tech. But Pierre at the time, when I was deciding to come back, was launching First Look Media, and so I joined him before the journalists had signed up, and I kind of ran product and hired product people, designers, engineers, and put them in New York. But as I was figuring out what came next, a couple of Sandhill VCs said, hey, would you come work for us? And I had seen the Omidyar role go by, and I was like, I'm not going to be a VC. But then when someone actually asked me, I was like, well, instead of just taking a pile of money and making a bigger pile of money, I would rather work for someone who I just hold in really high regard. And so I ended up at Omidyar Network. And so I never expected to do that. And
so it was really more about the relationship with Pierre and sort of feeling like that would be a good place to do that work. Yeah. So you've written about this, so I'll ask the question, how has your experience with cancer affected how you see the world now?
Yeah, so for background, in 2017, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. It completely hit me out of the blue, even though it shouldn't have. But I think it's changed. So I mean, like almost everything. I found out a week before I was pitching our board on the spin out, and so it was. And they said, it's the reason I work for Pierre. They were like, whatever you want to do. If you want to stop, we'll stop. If you want to keep going, we'll keep going. What do you want to do? And I said we want to keep going because as it hit me, as the news hit me, I realized like the most important thing to me was I had never felt that desperate to live. I was like, I want to live. I want to see my children grow up. I want to see my children have children, right? Like it was this intense desire that I never thought about like, do I want to live? Of course you want to live. But like at that moment, I was like, oh my God, I want this more than anything, right? And then the other things came up, right? Like, is this what I want to be doing? Like, is this the work that I want to be doing? And, for me, it was like, yeah, because of the fact that I wasn't just taking a pile of money and making a bigger pile of money, it reinforced that, yeah, this is the work that I want to be doing. And so, all of that was a reinforcing function. And I think, the things that it's changed is it's made me both, and this is a contradiction, it's made me both much more patient, like with my kids, because, before, like I have twin 11-year-old boys and they drive, it's a challenge with twin 11-year-old boys, but it's made me much more patient, but it's also made me much more impatient in terms of what I want to achieve in the world or what I'd like the world to be.
So sort of less tolerant of things that aren't the way they should be, maybe, or just.
Yeah, one of the things, my dad passed away in early February, and one of the things he'd always say was, you come with nothing and you go with nothing. And I got a middle of the night phone call when I was at Sundance, and I had to rush back to India, and kind of seeing him there really brought home the you go with nothing, right? And so it's between the coming and the going where you can have an impact. And what you leave is really the relationships that you make, the impact that you have on people, the impact that you have on the world while you're here. And being like, whether you have 1 million or 10 million or 1 billion, at the end you're still like lying there. And so it really made me realize that what you do really matters, and how you treat people, the relationships you form with people, and how you're spending your time. And so it's made me much more conscious of that.
Yeah, that resonates with me too. I had a period where my mom died and I got divorced and I lost my job, sort of all in a 6-month period, and it really was a clarifying thing for me. It also happened at the end of my 40s, where I think I was just ready to enter a different phase. And now, having purpose and really being clear about what that purpose is, and knowing that the work I'm doing is meaningful, is just, incredibly important to me. Yeah. So that's a great segue to talk about Spero Ventures. You have such a positive investment thesis. So was that the same thesis that you were investing, at Omidyar, and has that continued, or how has it evolved?
It was very similar. We refined it. And while we were launching, we looked at what we were doing, and I had conversations with my partners about, hey, these are the things that matter most, like my health and well-being, the work that I do, and the people that I'm connected to. And we looked at our portfolio and realized that's how we invest, and that's how we codified it. And so, a part of it was that, a part of it was, a big part of it was the illness, and a big part of it was Omidyar, right? Pierre is just one of the most value-driven people that I know. And he said to us, your thesis can be whatever it is that you want, right? He holds us accountable as a venture firm. Here are the returns I expect. You decide what it is that you want it to be. And we decided that we wanted to invest in things that at scale make a huge positive impact on the world. And so that's how we think about the world. And both of my partners, and actually the whole team, was at Omidyar. And they came there for a reason. And so we did feel like those roots mattered to us. So.
You invest alongside other women, without really making a big deal about it, essentially, right? Which is interesting and unusual. Was that a conscious decision when the team came together, and how do you think that affects the way you invest?
Yeah. So we're 5 people, and 4 of us are women, and it wasn't a conscious decision. I was just hiring the best people, and so I want to go back a little bit, right? At eBay, product at eBay in 2002 was 50% women. And product at eBay in 2005 was 50% women. I mean, that is a shocking statistic, right? Because product in any company today is not 50% women. And so way back then, we were 50% women. And the reason I believe that we were 50% women is we had a woman CEO. The woman I reported to, she ran technology ops, product design, engineering, right? So she had like the largest chunk of the company. She was a complete badass. She was a woman. I ran product. I was a woman. And so when you have women in leadership, you're just going to have an equal representation. It's not that we were looking to have 50% women. There's 50% of women in the world. So when you hire great people, you just end up with 50%.
Well, it goes back to an approach of just being, blind to the entire issue from when you were a child.
Yeah.
And your father just treating you equally.
Yeah, and I think, that continues today, right? Like when I joined Omidyar Network, I was like, hey, I want to bring on like the people I've worked with who've been amazing. And, I somehow convinced Ha to come on board. And Ha happens to be a woman, I didn't bring on Ha because she was a woman. Sarah Ashelman, who is our principal, was amazing at a media network, and I was like, I have to work with Sarah, and she happens to be a woman, you know. So we are all investors. We're not women investors. We're investors, and we happen to be women. So.
Yeah, I like that framing a lot. You know, I always used to chafe a little bit, you know, at the idea that I was a female lawyer or female consultant or any of those things.
Right.
You know, I didn't like that rubric, and I hope we can get to the point where we don't need that anymore.
Yeah, when I had Joanne, actually, so you just reminded me. So I interviewed Joanne Wilson, had a fireside chat with her a week ago, and then she interviewed Anna for her podcast, and then, you know, it's the full triangle. But one of the things I said when we did that fireside chat is it was the female investor and female founder event, just very similar to this. And I said, I want to just get to a stage where it's just the founders and the investors event, and it just so happens we're women in this room. So.
Yeah, exactly. It just so happens. So that's a great segue, you know, to what's happening with this kind of massive push for change in tech and venture, you know, led by organizations like All Raise and Time's Up. So what are you happy about that's happening in this movement, and what are you not happy about?
I think I'm just happy that the conversations are happening. I think it's important to raise these issues, and I think those organizations are amazing. They're really led by amazing women who are bringing the discussion into the public sphere, into mainstream media, and I think there's only positive to be gained from that. You know, I think what I just said, though, is like, I just think about the world a little bit differently, right? So I've never been part of an organization. And part of the reason for that is I just want to live those values. I think there's both models work in the world, and both models are required in the world. But, you know, I think, you know, the eBay example is really good of just saying, be amazing at what you do, and then you will make sure that there are more people like you. And we happen to be women, and so we should all do that. You know, I want to show versus tell, right? We're 4 investors out of 5. I'm disappointed.
Great principle of storytelling, by the way. Show
Exactly.
versus tell.
I mean, I'm disappointed by venture firms where they're like, we have our women partner. I mean, you're like, our woman partner? I mean, we're 50% of the population. Why is one woman partner enough? Or, you know, we have all of these women, and I'm like, okay, how many of them are GPs? Or firms where, you know, all of the admins are right there in front because they're the women, right? I mean, I want to live those values. We want to invest in women, and we do. We want our portfolio to reflect that, and we want our investing team to reflect that. And so, you know, I think both are required, and I am in huge support of those organizations, because what they're doing is you know, senior people have access, right? Younger people do not have access. And what an organization like All Raise does is it actually provides younger founders, younger investors with the level of access that they would not otherwise get. And so, you know, I know a lot of the women, and I'm a huge supporter.
Yeah. So Spero means hope.
Yep.
In Latin. So when you think about the future, like, what makes you hopeful?
You know, I think to be an investor, you have to be hopeful, right? Although hope is not a strategy, but you know, I think it's just such an amazing. I feel privileged to be in this job where I can meet founders who want to change the world, and I think, you know, that gives me so much hope, because we meet a lot of mission-driven founders, and so it really gives me hope. The big visions that they have, the big things that they want to achieve. And I get to do that every single day. So that's a hugely hopeful thing. The other thing is, I think the next generations, both millennials and Gen Z, are incredible, right? They care about mission. They care about the world and climate change. And, you know, I look at Gen Z, and I'm like, wow, I think they're going to be a really spectacular generation, because they're dealing with all the crap we're leaving them, and they have to find solutions. And I believe that tech, you know, I think there's policy decisions we have to make as a country and as a world to help things. And I think we'll get there. You know, I think we're in a moment in time which feels very hopeless, but I think, you know, even in hopelessness, there's a lot of positive. where people get energized, and instead of sitting back, they say, I can't sit back. I have to actually actively engage, and each of us needs to actively engage. So I think it's a good shock to the system to get us all engaged. And I feel like the generations to come are going to accomplish really great things, because even the big problems in the world, like climate change, I think technology can have a huge impact on them and helping solve them. So
yeah,
I'm
no,
generally an
I
optimist.
agree. And what I love about this job is getting to, meet people every day who see the world in a specific way and have found a solution to the particular problem that they feel the most passionate about. And I find that inspiring. I learn something from every founder I talk to, right? And so you're kind of living in the place where you get to sort of live in that hope for the future just through your experiences with founders.
Yeah. So
thanks.
You're welcome.
That's great.